Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So Tarek and I got a fun and interesting episode for you guys this evening because we're going to be talking about the recent changes with Duckstation and some of the headlines you may have seen from the maker talking about potentially shutting the entire project down moving forward. And while those headlines may be a little bit dramatic, Duckstation did just change its license agreement and how it can be used moving forward. So we're going to break that down, talk about what it means for emulation and Duckstation moving forward. Before you get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, down below hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But you'll see here from the headline, the creator talks about shutting the whole thing down. So before you go into the comments and yell clickbait, I am just using the words of the lead developer of Duckstation. I'm not imparting any of my own opinion onto this, and honestly, I doubt they shut it down anytime soon. But Duckstation is such an absolute resource in the PlayStation 1 emulation community. It is the preeminent way to emulate PlayStation 1 games, both to make them look like they would have been had you used original hardware, as well as to throw on some of the best enhancements around. And Duckstation has been out for many years. It runs on basically any platform whatsoever, Windows, Android, other platforms being stuff like Xbox Series X. It is the ubiquitous emulator when it comes to PlayStation 1. There's so many different releases, so many different platforms. If you've emulated PlayStation 1 in like the last 3 to 4 to 5 years, odds are you have used Duckstation. It really is the preeminent way to emulate your PlayStation 1 games today. If we take a look over at GitHub, where they keep all of the source code and all of the licensing information, this is an open source emulator, which means you can see all of the source code that it is compiled under, and you can even make changes and do pull requests to add it to the actual emulator in and of itself. And the goal in the end is to make this as accurate as possible while also giving you all of those different enhancements that you see on screen when I show you footage. To say that this is an impressive project would be an absolute understatement. But there is a situation going on where the distribution of Duckstation has been changed under the licensing agreement from one open source license to another that is more restrictive, but it does make some logical sense as to why that actually happened. And you'll see here in the interview, and I'll also go over to the GitHub page, the Duckstation emulator has moved over to a CC licensing agreement, which is different than what it was initially licensed under, where you could basically do absolutely anything you wanted with the source code and the emulator in general. And if we take a look at the GitHub page under the license, you will see it's a creative, non-commercial, non-derivative 4.0 international license. That is going to mean a big difference in how Duckstation can be used. So let's pop over to that licensing page and kind of break it down for you so you understand what this means. Attribution, non-commercial, non-derivative. We're going to take each and every one of those words and break them down into their core components so you understand how they function moving forward. And you'll see here that this license does give you the ability to share and redistribute the material in any medium or format, and the licensor cannot revoke these freedoms as long as you follow the license terms, which means that you can still share and use Duckstation, do whatever you want with it in that respect. But under the terms on this, attribution means you need to give credit to the makers, especially if you do anything with the emulator and something like repackaging it, which could or could not be permitted under this license. We'll have to wait and see, but attribution was definitely a sticking point in this situation. And I understand that completely. If you're working on something and somebody else wants to use that work, being attributed for your work is the bare minimum. I've had channels much larger than me steal my content, including shots from my camera on my dining room table, and I have found out by viewers, having your stuff stolen is never a fun time, especially if they don't issue you credit. I did make them issue a retraction as well as a ton of links in the description. But even then, I still have a sour taste in my mouth knowing a channel that has multiple hundreds of thousands of subscribers just took content from me without ever asking. And the non-commercialization of Duckstation makes total sense, and you have to let me get there. The PlayStation 1 wasn't just used as a home console, it was also used as multiple different arcade boards. And right here you're taking a look at the Konami GV, also known as the Baby Phoenix, and that's going to become very important in a few minutes, but stick with me here so you understand how arcade hardware on PlayStation 1 does exist. It's a fun platform. It had a lot of good games, including Simpsons Bowling, which is going to be a little bit at the heart of the commercialization and profiting off of open source software like Duckstation, and how that would not be allowed to happen moving forward. And if you've never seen any PlayStation 1 arcade hardware, it is a fun time. The Konami GV basically is just a stock PlayStation 1 with a SCSI CD-ROM drive on there, as well as some other additional boards you can use for controls. And that is always a fun time to know that your PlayStation 1 had a life outside of your home console setup. But this is what happens when arcade games get re-released, especially if they end up using emulation at the base to be able to re-release them. They have to run on something, and no one's making new arcade boards for PlayStation 1 anymore. So it was found a couple years ago, and this is tied into this, is Simpsons Bowling from Arcade 1-Up runs under Duckstation. It is a fork of the emulator because Simpsons Bowling does have custom I/O boards and other security features that would not be enabled or available on a stock PlayStation 1 console. And basically what happened is Arcade 1-Up pivoted onto Duckstation to make all of this work, and I could totally understand how that would make the creator of Duckstation upset. There's a term I've always loved that I feel like appropriately describes what's going on here. It feels like everyone's eating steak while I eat beans. What that means is you put in all the hard work and somebody comes along and derives the profit from it, and it feels like suddenly you're working for free for somebody else who's cashing the checks off your hard work. But that's the reality of open source software. There's two sides to the coin, and that can happen. Now apparently, and I can't verify this, but it is what has been said, Arcade 1-Up basically didn't provide the source code to the improvements they made to get the Simpsons game running, and that goes to the attribution and making sure that everything is kept open source, because if you take a piece of open source software and you modify it, you should be making that open source as well. If you go up on GitHub, some of the code is here, but it doesn't seem complete, at least to my eye, and that would be the non-commercial section of the new clauses. And you'll see here no derivatives. If you remix, transform, or build upon the material, you may not distribute the modified material. So now with that license, somebody like Arcade 1-Up couldn't actually take a Konami GV, take Duckstation, rewrite some of the code, and redistribute it as an emulation platform just for their Android-based arcade cabinets. And that is where the real change lies in this new license. You can no longer take Duckstation, change up the code, fork it, try to sell it, and make sure that you make your money while nobody else does, and while you just get free right to distribute it. And now that has definitely been closed down. And of course, that is the interesting thing about commercialization of open source software. You can still buy the Simpsons arcade machine today for $699, and you will notice there is a trackball in the middle. The Simpsons beat 'em up from Konami never used a trackball, but the Simpsons Bowling did, and that is what was used on the system itself. Duckstation's inside of that running on Android. Now, as far as actually shutting the project down, the maker does talk about all of the drama and demands in the background, and I get it. It seems like every community can be rife with these demands and threats, so I don't hope that they take it to the ultimate extreme and actually end up shutting Duckstation down, because it does benefit so many different people. But on the flip side of that coin, the original author gets to decide what they do with their work. Now, I work in film and television, I have for a very long time, and I do believe that the artist that creates the work should have control over it. But of course, I have a fine art degree, multiple in fact, so my ability to create work is different than trying to write code. I'm not saying writing code isn't artistry, but I just work under a different set of criteria when it comes to licensing. It's not on the software licensing side. My area of expertise is licensing for film and television distribution, music rights, and everything thereafter. But I do understand how these things work. Of course, I just don't code. Trust me, you wouldn't want to see my code. It's not very good whatsoever. But Duckstation is a massive asset, and I really don't think it is going to shut down. But I understand if the author doesn't want companies being able to take Duckstation, change the code, not provide the source code so it can be merged into MAME if wanted, and then basically profiting off the entire endeavor. Because it's not like you give any money to the authors of Duckstation when you download it. You just click the download button and you're off to the races, and you get an absolutely spectacular 10 out of 10 PlayStation 1 emulation experience. So the idea that this could be shut down is a definite bummer, but I do feel like maybe the creator here is just using some blustery language to say and explain why they made the change. I'm sure they are taking some heat in the background by changing the licensing terms on Duckstation, because that attribution, non-commercial, non-derivative 4.0 international deed, and that is a mouthful to say, give me credit for not tripping up there, does limit what you can do with Duckstation. But as far as the end user is concerned, downloading Duckstation, emulating PlayStation 1 games, enhancing them, and enjoying them in your own home, absolutely nothing whatsoever changes, and that should be the real takeaway. A developer couldn't take Duckstation, package up a new arcade cabinet or a new emulation board, and sell it for a profit under this license, but that's not what you're doing. You're not trying to profit off Duckstation, you're just trying to enjoy PlayStation 1 games at home better than the original home console experience, and you can still absolutely do that. So as far as this goes moving forward, I don't think you're really going to see any fundamental change to Duckstation unless the creator gets really upset and kills the entire project, but my guess would be that's not going to happen. But you guys were asking me these questions over Twitter and on Discord, and I figured I'd do a video. Sure that if you have any questions, leave them down below, but I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.